Welcome to the third video in our series on clones. In this video, we'll explore the basics of creating clones and understand how they behave in Hopscotch once they are created. In part 1, we will cover the create a clone block and the when object is cloned rule. If you're looking for just a summary on how to use these blocks, you can watch this section. Then, in part 2, we will use what we have learnt to add more enemies to our Space Invaders project. Part 1. Summary of the create a clone block and when object is cloned rule. Let's go over the basics of creating clones. In this part, I'll demonstrate using some clone blocks. You don't need to code along here. You can set this video to be full screen. So the word clone just means copy. The create a clone block will make another copy of the same object. The clone will have all the traits as the object that cloned it. So it will have the same size, speed, rotation, X position, Y position, and so on that the object has at the moment of cloning. The clone will also inherit all values of custom variables and merged local variables from the object that cloned it. I will quickly create a clone to illustrate. So I'll add when game starts and a create a clone block. I'll play the project to see what happens and see if the clone is created. So it looks like nothing has really happened since the clone has been created and is in the same position as the previous object and has the same size. This makes it difficult to see the clone at all. Since the clone has the same X position and Y position as the previous object, it will appear at the position of the previous object. So since the clone currently doesn't have any behavior that is different to the previous object, how will we be able to tell them apart? All clones of an object share the same code that you have put inside the object. But this does not necessarily mean that every clone will run all of that code. Each clone will run the code only if the rules also trigger for itself, and if the conditions are true in its case. For example, with a when iPad or when iPhone is tapped rule, the clones will run code in this rule, since the rule triggers for all of them when you tap your device. But the when game starts rule will never be triggered for a clone. This is because the clones did not yet exist at the time that the game started. They were created by another object after the game had already started. The when object is cloned rule triggers for each clone right when the clone has just been created. The original object will not run code in this rule, since the rule will never trigger for it, because it is not a clone and has not just been cloned. I want my clone to have a different position to the original object, so that I can see where it is. Let's go back into edit mode. I will use the when object is cloned rule to add code that will be run only by the clone. I'll add a move forward block and set it to 50 units. Then let's make it shrink by 10%. Now I'll play the project. Cool! I can tell it apart from the original object now. Let's explore another aspect of clones a little further. Clones will inherit the properties of the object that cloned it. For example, if I have robo clone itself and move forward and shrink, what will happen if that clone creates another clone? Let's add another create a clone block to see what happens. Wow, this looks pretty neat. I have a line of shrinking robos. It looks like this line keeps on going. Looking back at the code, what is happening is that each clone moves forward, shrinks by 10%, and creates a clone of itself. The clone will have the same properties as the object that it was cloned from, so it will start in the same X position, same Y position, and have the same size. Then it will move forward, shrink itself, and create another clone, which will start with the same properties as itself. So this code will keep on going. If I want the clones to stop after a certain number of objects have been created, I can use a check once if block. I can check if the total clones of this object, that is, how many of this object exists, is less than 10 before creating another clone. We'll find out more about the total clones variable in a later video of this series. Let's play the project to see what happens. We have a line of 10 robos. Great! Now that we have gone over the basics of how clones are created and what rules they respond to, let's return to our Space Invaders project. Part 2. Adding more enemies. We're going to be coding along here, so if you're following this video in the app, just make the video smaller again so that you can watch it and code along. Just some notes before we start. While you're watching the video, I'll give you time to pause and follow along. Feel free to rewind whenever you like, and there are closed captions available for this video as well. In our Space Invaders project, we have just one enemy, and it's pretty quick to take it down. Let's add more enemies for a more challenging and engaging experience. One way of doing it is, we could add new enemy objects manually and add the same code to each of them to create more enemies. But clones can be very handy for generating a lot of objects quickly, where the objects have similar behaviors. So let's look at how to use clones to create lots of enemies more efficiently. Let's get started with coding. Tap on the enemy and then tap See Code. You'll see that there's a When Game Starts rule that has an enemy movement custom ability underneath it. This describes the movement for the enemy to move across and down the screen. Let's clone another enemy. Tap in the empty space below the When Game Starts rule to add a new rule. Scroll right to find When Game Starts and tap that. Then scroll right to the Control Flow section with the blue blocks and tap on the Create a Clone block. Pause here to add the code to your own project. Let's play the project to see what this clone will do. Tap the play button in the top right corner of the screen. It looks like the cloned enemy doesn't move around, but it does have the same traits as the original enemy. It has the same X position, Y position, size, and so on. So it has spawned in the same position as the original enemy, it is the same size as the original enemy, and so forth. But the clone doesn't have the movement that the original enemy does. When I shoot at it, both the original and cloned enemy do disappear. Let's go back into edit mode to see what's going on with the movement of our cloned enemy. Tap the button in the top left corner of the screen to go back into edit mode. There is a custom rule at the bottom of the enemy's code. Tap the arrow on the left of the custom rule to expand it. We know that the clone did respond to this When Self Bumps Player Projectile rule because it destroyed itself accordingly. The destroy block will be explored in more detail in its own video, by the way, later on in this series. But it seems that the clone doesn't do anything in the When Game Starts rule, so it didn't run this enemy movement code. This is because the When Game Starts block runs at the very start of the game, and this clone didn't yet exist at the time when the game had started. This clone was created by another object after the game had started. So we need a way to be able to run code for our clone when it has just been created. The When Object is Cloned rule lets us do this. It runs code for a clone right as it has just been created. Tap in the empty space below the second When Game Starts rule. Then scroll right to find the When Object is Cloned rule and tap that. And just a quick note, this rule will appear in your When's library only after you have used the Create a Clone block somewhere in your project. Scroll left to the Custom section of the keyboard. Tap the Enemy Movement Custom ability to add it into this rule. Let's play the project to see what happens. Tap the play button in the top right corner of your screen. So we don't have an enemy that is standing still anymore. Although it looks like only one enemy is moving right now, the clone is actually on top of the original object. They started in the same position and are moving at the same time. Let's go back into edit mode to try and work out a way of letting us see them each separately. Tap the arrow in the top left corner of the screen to go back into edit mode. There are many different ways that you can try to be able to tell clones apart, such as through adjusting their appearance. One way, in this case, is to make them start in different positions from each other. This way, we can see where each of the enemies is moving afterwards and be able to tell them apart. We can use the Enemy Random Position ability to make the enemy clone position itself randomly before moving. Tap in the space above the enemy movement custom ability in the When Object is Cloned rule. Then, under the Custom section of the keyboard, you'll see the Enemy Random Position ability. Tap that to add it into your code. Tap the arrow on the left of the Enemy Random Position ability to see what is inside. This custom ability makes objects place themselves in a random X position but keep their current Y position. In other words, they will place themselves in a random horizontal position. Tap the play button in the top right corner of the screen to test what happens. Now we have two enemies moving around without having to have manually dragged out two enemy objects and added the same code to both of them. We can also tell them apart from each other more easily by adding a random position behavior that is run by the clone. Now that we have established two enemy objects that behave as we want so far, let's go back into edit mode to create some more. Tap the arrow on the top left corner of the screen to go back into edit mode. If we want 20 enemies, we can use the repeat block to create clones 19 times. That will be 20 enemies, which includes one original object and 19 clones. In the second When Game Starts rule, tap in the empty space above the Create a Clone block. Scroll right to the Control Flow section and tap the repeat block. Next, enter the number 19. Then, drag the Create a Clone block inside it. Pause here to add the code to your own project. Play the project to see if we have as many enemies as expected now. Tap the play button in the top right corner of the screen. Now we have 20 enemies. Great! In the next video, we'll look at how to use the destroy block to let the players shoot more projectiles at once and take on all these enemies. See you in the next video, and happy hopscotching!